All right, my name is Berta. A lot of you know me already, some of you don't. I'm going to give you some information about me and who I am and what I do. I work with a company called NSG here in Nashville. We're a technology company, and my boss is right back there. I'm very lucky to be working with them. They let me hack pretty much all day, do threat assessment, whatever I need to do. It's great. I work also with the Nashville Tech Council, which is here in Nashville. We put on events with ISSA and a bunch of other people. It's a lot of fun and a lot of work. But today we're going to be talking about advanced persistent threats. Does anybody in here know what that is or heard of it? APTs, we hear it all the time in the news. We know nobody is safe from it. JP Morgan, big banks, companies. But today we're going to be talking more or less about some of the operations that were ran and the history of it. Because the history of APTs is kind of like why we all have jobs right now. You know, some of these operations are still ongoing. Some of them ended in the 80s, but we'll go over that. So we're going to be going over what an APT is, the history of an APT, the life cycle. These actually have life cycles. They're not like most attacks where smash and grab. We'll go over that as well. And then how to stay protected against an APT attack. A lot of people think, I have the most cutting edge software and hardware running on all my servers, and it's not going to keep you protected. So we'll go over some of that. But what is an APT? Everybody asks me. Advanced Persistent Threat, or APT. And these type of attacks aren't like regular smash and grab attacks. These are thought out. They're very well planned. They come from a lot of the same attack methods that we see now. These include drive-by downloads, which we see all the time now. We see SQL injections. We see malware. Now, these aren't regular type of malware that you get for like PC Optimizer Pro or something on a computer. These are custom built to attack targets. We see Trojans, not like regular Trojans that we see, but also advanced Trojans that have special features built into them, and we'll go over a couple of them. And then we have phishing, which we see every day in our personal email as well as work email. And these are just to name a few. So why are they different? These are different from regular smash and grab attacks that we normally see hackers doing, where they breach a target, they get the information, and they leave sloppy. These people often stay in the computer systems for very long periods of time. Every attack is fit for that environment. If they're attacking government, that attack is going to be based off what that government agency or program is running. We see that they take a very long time to execute. There's an APT attack that's still running right now that's been running since the 1980s, still under investigation. Their standards are higher. Not anybody can join. Unlike certain collectives that we see online where if you're wanting to join the operation attacking a target, they say, yeah, come join us. You can denial a service attack or you can help scan. These people are normally very secretive about what they're doing. And the group that's involved in it is a group that's staying in it. No outsiders are allowed in. And we also see that these attacks are set with a certain goal in mind. These attackers aren't just trying to gain access to some random server that gets some random files. They're normally going after like blueprints and emails and secrets and maps and whatever the goal may be. So we'll get into some of the history behind it and why these attacks are important and how they've really changed the world of cybersecurity. So we'll start with the first one. So our first attack, does anybody know what this is, if you can see it? Has satellites and missiles. Does anybody know the name of the program? Star Wars program, right. So our first APT attack, the word APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat, wasn't even used then. We just knew it was an attack on U.S. soil. And what it was West German hackers were pretty much probing computers over here, which led to them gaining access to the servers. Later on, after they gained access the first time, they got a bunch of their buddies, came in, and that's where the attack on the Star Wars program came. With this happening, we have no idea really what was stolen during that time, what documents were taken, what type of damage was done. There was no actual intelligence investigation that was ran at that point in time. Does anybody know what this one was? 1998 to 1999? It was an attack on the, sorry, it's a funny picture of the Pentagon. It was an attack called Operation Moonlight Maze. Has anybody ever heard of that? Yeah. So this was an attack that was attacked against the Pentagon, NASA, and U.S. Department of Energy. What they were doing, they were probing computers to see which ones they could gain access to. This led to theft of hundreds of thousands of documents, including military maps and military hardware designs. This was the very first time that we had ever seen in history a full-scale cyber investigation take place. This is also where we get the word red teams from. They had a team come in to try to recreate the attack that happened on the Pentagon. Now, it wasn't necessarily the same way, but they found different ways that people were gaining access to the computer systems. And then later on that we found that it became from a Russian origin. Now, once we confronted the Russians about it, they were like, we take no part in this. This attack went on for 2 years, and it's still under investigation to this day. There's no telling what information they got, how it was obtained, and where it went afterwards.
Excuse me, real quick.
Yep.
The West German hackers, that wasn't the same bit that was basically was the basis for Cuckoo's Egg, was it?
It runs along the same lines of that. Okay. Yeah, so it's in the same area. The information that was found on the Star Wars program, and I'll be upfront about it, it was so scattered on how people gained access to what it was done. Some people say it was done one way. Some people say it was done another. Reports are real, at that point in time, they really had no idea what was going on. They knew it was West German, and that's about all they really knew at that point in time. 2003 to 2006. Operation Titan Rain. This was the Chinese versus everything in the United States, whether it was part of Lockheed Martin, Redstone Arsenal, or NASA, they gained access to it. This was the first time where we had really ever seen major threat from the Chinese. They used proxies, Trojan computers, custom spyware, phishing attempts, you name it, they were doing it. Now, a good thing to mention with this is, have you ever noticed that the Chinese spaceship kind of looks like the American spaceship? You know what I'm talking about? This falls underneath that operation that was ran. This is when a lot of our prints were taken. They're not really for sure. They know it was, about 3 years they were in the systems. But, what was stolen with that also remains unknown. At this point in time, we really didn't have the technology to be able to go in and recreate everything that was going on. Now, we kind of have cutting edge technology where, we have IDSs and IPSs set up and they're running all the time. At this point in time, they still don't even know, what the total loss was. This was Operation Titan Rain. Yep. Now, do we have anybody in here that is very familiar with malware and Trojans, plays with them on a regular basis? No, it's okay. We're in a room full of friends. It's all right. So Zeus, has anybody heard of Zeus? Yeah, Zeus developers versus the U.S. Department of Transportation. And this took place in 2007. So this was aimed to steal credit card information and banking information from the U.S. Department of Transportation. This was a sophisticated piece of command and control malware that had a Trojan-based interface for it. This normally came through via phishing or, third-party download, or somebody dropped off a USB at their work and they plugged it in. Within the last couple of years, in 2010, we had over 100 people arrested that was involved in this operation. They were from the US, the UK, and the Ukraine. They were charged with bank fraud and money laundering, and they knew they stole up to $70 million in theft. That's a lot. You think about it, it's Department of Transportation, all this money coming in, and a lot of money going out. RSA. Who remembers this when RSA got hit? Does anybody know how it happened? It's actually so easy what they did. I'll break it down for you. Some guy got a phishing email, right? Inside this phishing email was an Excel document that had an exploit for Flash. Once the document was ran, the Flash vulnerability was ran, then they were backdoored with poison ivy, which is a type of Trojan. Once that happened, poison ivy lay dormant on the system. When these people left, the RSA people left work during the day, the people that were running the poison ivy server were connecting to it at night, and they were able to steal everything. This included the secure ID authentication technology, and it resulted into over about $100 million in damages to RSA, plus reputation. And this took place right after the conference that RSA had. So they go to a conference and say, we're so secure, and then the next month they release, sorry, we got hacked, and so did our secure ID information. Who in here is familiar with StuckNet? A lot of people. So this is my personal opinion, and a lot of people may think differently about it. StuckNet is one of those things that's an iffy subject. Everybody has their own opinions about it. To me, StuckNet was a U.S.-Israel operation against the Iraq nuclear facilities. This was spread via dirty USB, which we're starting to see a lot more of in the news. And it attacked the Siemens industrial software and equipment. Has anybody ever seen what happens when StuckNet infects something? No? So I'll put it in perspective. They infected an air compressor with StuckNet, right? Whole command and control, everything was set up. The air compressor was running at 150%, as fast as this air compressor could go. But the regulators were only showing it was running at 25%, right? You see what I'm saying? So by them being infected with that, they have no idea. This software pretty much had backdoors to everything. It had clearances for everything the way that it was designed, and it did millions of dollars worth of damage. Later on, we started seeing like Dooku and Flame. These were variants of StuckNet that came out in 2011 and 2012 that did the same amount of damage. With the StuckNet, though, it had an auto-destruct feature. This auto-destruct feature was set for June of 2012. They figured if they couldn't do the damage that needed to be done by June of 2012, they better pull out. The information deleted itself, it erased everything, it left no trail at all. Very sophisticated. Then Operation Red October. Who here has heard of Red October? It's been in the media quite a bit here lately. Red October, to me, is probably one of the best APT attacks that has ever happened. The reason for that, it was the Red October hackers. We don't know who they are still, versus the world. They were literally going for global domination. This is a small map. Everything in red is what's been infected. It's kind of hard to see, but it shows energy, departments, industrial, everything. This piece of malware was developed to infect every single technology piece that you could bring to work. We're talking routers, switches, mobile phones, USB drives, mobile devices, Android and Apple devices, you know. Nothing was safe from these guys. Once they were in the system, they were able to see how that company was ran, how the information was accessed, and then they built their malware around the stuff that was on the network. With this, we had diplomatic trade secrets, military, aerospace, energy, research organization, and secrets walk right out the door from all over the world. Now, if you kind of look at this map, the one country, well, there's a couple countries, but the main country that's on this map that has nothing infected in it is what country? There you go. So we'll just blame Canada. We don't know the origin of it, though. The code for this is beyond sophisticated. It's like StuckNet level with the writing of it. This went on for 5 years, they think, before they started seeing it in 2012. Once it was found, the damage was already done. There's no percentage of data loss on what actually walked out the door because there's no logs. There's no IPs coming in and any of the, you know, the filters for the IDSs and the IPSs. It's just, it's going to be one of those mysteries. Hopefully in 20 years, we'll find out. So let's talk about the life cycle. Most cyber attacks have a life cycle, right? You have to have a start, a goal, and then a finish. So with our life cycles for APTs, we know that they're sophisticated. So we need our goals. We need to set a goal that we're going to achieve, while we're attacking. We're not going to hit them blind, because we all know what happens if you hit something blind. You end up arrested, and that's never any fun. You need to gain access to the system. You don't necessarily need to gain access to the server right away, but you need to gain access to at least one computer on the network. This can be done however you want it to be done, either phishing, which we're starting to see a lot of, drive-by download, ad injection, the list goes on and on for it. And then network access. Once you have access to the network from that user's computer, pretty much have everything you need, right? Well, you're going to have to develop your own tool sets or use pre-existing tool sets on that server. You're not going to want to leave, any information behind or who you are or where it's coming from. You're going to have to figure out the shift work of when people are working and when they're not working. And we see this a lot. Do any of you guys run any IDSs or IPSs at your work? Do you ever watch the logs, like the minute you leave work, literally at 5 o'clock, 5:01, everything drops. But then you give it a little bit, and then there's a huge spike of stuff trying to come into your network. This is what we call shift work. This is where the bad guys from various countries are hammering everything you have with bots or it's them. So you'll have to work on this with the tool set. And then cover your tracks. This is your end goal. So after you get the information, the documents you want, you're going to have to leave. But you can't leave any tracks that you were there, because we all know what happens if you're in a computer and you leave tracks. They'll find out who you are, where you live. Next thing you know, you have SWAT team rappelling through the roof, through little tiny skylights, and they shoot you and all types of good stuff. So it's never any fun. So how long does this actually take? APT attacks, as we just talked about, some last 5-6 years. Some of these attacks are still going on that we talked about. They take years. These people that do this are very dedicated to what they're doing, and it's the only thing that they're doing. Most of them are government sponsored. Some of them aren't government sponsored. Some of them are hacking collectives from all around the world. A good example is Red Hack. Has anybody ever heard of them? Turkey-based hacking organization? No. They run APT attacks all the time against their government. Government arrests a member of their team. Red Hack launches a huge, attack against them. And these attacks have been going on for the last 20 years, back and forth. Even though they know who they are and where they're coming from, it's still classified as an APT attack because the attacks are very advanced.
And I'll say one thing. We're doing CouchCon here, right? So we've got to.
That's good.
So some of the things to keep in mind, like some of these attackers, what we might consider advanced are it's not advanced necessarily in the aspect of like the technology always. Like on the exfil he was talking about earlier, like how do you not get caught? There are some companies that like low tech is high tech, where so in the instance of like some of the recent credit card breaches, they're literally uploading these jokers via FTP. And you're kind of like, well, how's that APT? Well, the reason it's APT is that, A, they knew that was open. They knew that they could exfil the data that way. And the reality is that, so let's say that they set off the alarm when they start uploading a ton of FTP. Are they quick enough? Can they respond fast enough to stop it before it's out? And the reality is they knew that they weren't. They knew that they'd probably go, wow, that's interesting. We got a spike in this particular protocol. But they knew they could get it out fast enough and it didn't matter. Because once it's exfilled, it does. Like, that's when they want to get caught. That's ultimately what a lot of these APTs are. It's like, no, that's terrible. They saw you, you only saw them when they wanted you to be seen. Hopefully that makes sense.
It does. So a good example with that is JP Morgan. They knew for 2 years somebody was inside their system. They didn't know where it was coming from or how it was being done, but for the last 2 years, they've known that they've had a breach on their hand, but they didn't know where it was coming from, how it was being done, what was being done on the system, because it was very low on their radar. And then, a couple weeks ago in the news, we see what happened, and they became very high on their radar with some data leaks. So that brings us how to stay protected. We talk about this a lot. Our job is to keep our clients safe, keep our companies safe. We're kind of like the crime fighters of the internet, if you want to think about it for our company. So a good way to stay protected is syslog servers. Now, review your logs, go over them, look for inconsistencies.
Thank you, God.
No,
Don't buy anything. Just don't. God, thank you.
No problem. So yeah, go through your logs, look for inconsistencies in the logs. If you see something that doesn't look right, investigate it. See where that information's coming from, see where it's going, if it made it through. And then, trace its origin back to where it came from. If you guys don't understand how to do that, come see me. We'll talk about it, or see any of these guys. But your logs will save you. Yes, sir.
Can I add a comment to that? For God's sake, don't allow delete access on your logs. I've seen that before.
Yeah, if you're not remotely logging, one of the things, and when he talks about syslog, I would take it to mean that you are centrally logging, okay? And that's not necessarily time, there's a few ways that you can do this. I mean, you can either do real-time logging, just forwarding logs and stuff like that, and this is not to sidejack his talk anymore, but if you're interested in how to do that very effectively, even for Windows boxes that don't handle protocols like syslog, come talk to me. I'll share with you some free tools. No, Snare sucks. No. There's a tool called NXLog, okay? NXLog, open source, kicks ass. If you want to know how to use it, come talk to me, but you can find it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, do it in real time, because then you don't have to worry about the delete log type of stuff or the overwrite. You're going to have to do that on workstations. You're going to have to allow them to overwrite. They're going to run out of disk space at some point. You have to centrally locate your logs, or else if you're going back after the fact, that means you're not monitoring these, honestly. You can't take any value out of those logs and be collecting them after, at an interval or whatever. Maybe an hour if you have to for network performance or something like that, but you need to be collecting these at interval and reviewing them very regularly and understanding that that's going to be after the fact. So,
Right. Another thing that is important to me is policies. Now, everybody hates policies, but we're the people that make the policies. We're the people that tell our users how they're going to do it, whether they like it or not. You know what I mean? The reason that we have policies in place is to keep everybody protected. Now, what you put in your policies is going to be different than what I put in my policies. It's going to be like that for everybody that's in this room. But there's a reason they're called policies and rules. These keep our users protected from bringing something malicious into our companies. Patches. You would not believe, not with work, but at home. Good example. My favorite country in the world, Tunisia. Not going to get into it a whole lot, why I'm on camera and here in front of everybody. But patches. Keep everything current. Don't run Windows XP boxes, Keep everything up to date, especially your Flash and your Java. We're starting to see more and more attacks that are Flash and Java based than anything. Now, you may update your Flash and your Java today, and tomorrow there's going to be an update, or 3 days later. Doesn't matter. Run your updates. Do them when they come out. See what they do, and understand them. Say what?
Or uninstall them.
Yeah. Who here has seen that there's a 0 day for Office? Just came out, right? Only a couple people. Everybody else is like, what are you talking about? It's a 0 day that affects 32-bit machines that have PowerPoint installed on them. How many people have PowerPoint installed on their computer? How many people, when they leave here, they're going to go read about this 0 day to see who can gain? Yeah, exactly. See, it's things like this. Every morning, my boss back there, Matt, raise your hand. How many times do I come to your office in the morning and say we have a problem? Every morning, right? Because I'm researching it. I get to work super early, and I research these threats that are coming out. Now, I know it may be hard and for larger companies to do this, but you need to set aside time to understand what the threats are that are coming out. Another thing, communication is very important. Now, if you work within a company where you bounce off ideas from other IT people and they don't know the answer, hit the internet. I mean, that's the only way it's going to be. Like I was describing during lunch, who here is familiar with like ransomware? Everybody, right? I needed to find out who made a piece of ransomware, so I took to the internet. I ended up finding the guy that made it, and we had a long discussion about how various things for ransomware worked. It's things like this that can save your company. And last, education. Never stop learning about the threats that are coming out. Every day, there's a new threat that comes out. Tomorrow, there's going to be 10 new threats that come out. It's our job to keep ahead of these threats, to fully understand how they work, whether you have to test them or read the comments to see how a certain application works. Just take a couple of minutes out of your day, hit the internet, understand it. If you don't understand it, then go back to the communication, start talking with people, see if somebody can show you how the program works, see if, you can modify it to work how you want it to work instead of the way the attacker did, so you're fixing other problems. And in general, just stay on top of everything. That, it's our job, not our client's job, not our network administrator's job, not the CRM's job or anybody else's job to keep everybody protected. It's our job. Yeah, it's a lot of weight, but at the end of the day, you can kind of say you were James Bond on the internet. So it's a lot of fun. All right, that's the end of my talk. Thank you guys for coming. Do we have any questions? Any questions at all on APTs? No? Anybody? You guys on the couch?
So you mentioned like state-sponsored versus other types of APT actors. For the room here, and I have my own opinions based on the work that I do, what would you say is the most, like, everybody likes to talk about nation-state actors and things like that, but what would you say is the most active APT that you're seeing right now?
A lot of the stuff that I personally see, it's state-sponsored attacks that we're seeing from like a lot of Asian countries, China,
Now, are you seeing those directly? So I'm curious, are you seeing those actors directly from the countries that they're originating from, or what would you say, like, how are they, like, the actors themselves may be in a certain location, but what about their patterns of activity?
So what I see pattern-wise is it goes back to the shift work. It's for certain targets that I've seen it on, logs and everything, it seems like they know exactly when we're getting off and how our work schedules are scheduled. They know that most people work 9 to 5, right? So at 6 o'clock, they're going to start the scanning. And it's not going to be intensive scanning, but it's still enough to show up on logs. Now, in the middle of the night on Christmas, we'll say that as an example, where are you going to be? You're going to be at home. You're not going to be at work. So why not hammer it? And that's kind of what I'm starting to see in some of the reports that I've seen, is the activity is increasing on certain days of the week that people just don't care, Monday, Friday, and the weekends. And if you look at the logs, you'll see a spike greatly in traffic at night, not during the daytime logs, which if you do look at that, you'll still see activity from those countries, just not as much. But at night, you'll see a spike during those 4 days. Yes, sir.
So I guess the upshot of that is if your business runs a standard 8 to 5 or 7 to 5 or whatever it is, then you really need to log heavily on those outside hours.
You need to log heavily all the time.
I guess what I mean to say is you not only log heavily, but you really watch those times outside of normal business hours. Because that's where
Well, if you're getting in good log data, especially when you talk about where it's a little more obvious what they're doing, where it doesn't line up against false positives, you can automate a lot of that response.
Right.
And say, this IP starts being on me too much, fine, push back and shove them in there.
Right. So a good example with that is, running nightly backups and stuff. They're going to show up on your IDS because, it's kicking off all this traffic, tons of bandwidth and everything. So you see that. And, the IDS that you're running, it may show it as, a high alert. So you're getting these like massive traffic spikes that, every night at 11 o'clock are just kicking off. Research what that is. If you can, change the priority on that one alert and then watch it the next day. If it doesn't change, go in, research it again. And, you need to really understand the signatures or the SIDs that they're running on. Once you understand the signatures or the alerts they're throwing, you're really able to see what's happening on your network. Now, you just don't want to check it at night. You want to check it during the day too, because you also have users. And we all know users just like to click on everything, especially when they're like, free download, blah, blah, blah. So they click on it, and next thing you know, they're infected. You want to catch that as well. A good way that you can do it, if you have one of these devices, is you can set the alerts. If you're hitting 100 high alerts of something or, whatever the number may be, send me a notification on it. If you're hitting X amount number of medium alerts, but you're still wondering about it, send me a notification. That way you can see it happening in real time, and that way you can go back and track it instead of finding out about it the next morning when you come in at 6.
So I guess it comes back to the old saw, know what's normal.
Right.
Well, and you can use, depending on what kind of stuff you're using for your log collection, they standard deviations and other types of functions. So you can have your system calculate those time-based trends, and that way you can kind of define what's normal and then threshold.
Right. So a good example with that is, I got a company that sent us a couple IDSs, and long run, didn't like any of them. So I made my own IDS, not hard to do. And then programmed a bunch of signatures in it so I could see what was happening at night on the network. And then as time went on, I had everything set to a high alert. Now that sounds crazy to have everything set to a high alert, but I custom adjusted over 200,000 signatures, the high, medium, or low. That way at night, when stuff is happening, we don't see the backups on there. We don't see computers updating, things of that nature. I get to see pure data of what is coming in or trying to come into my network that doesn't need to be there. And if you want to know how to do that, just get with me. I can show you, some really cool stuff on how to modify signatures for any IDS for any company that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll kind of throw out. So I work for a company. I do like analytics, and so I do a lot of stuff with logging data and that type of stuff. And that's kind of why when I see syslog and that type of stuff, yeah, absolutely run your IDS, run those types of things. But what a lot of people misses in a lot of security departments is that you've got your administrators and other things. They're watching the log data from applications and server logs and OS logs and things like that, and they're watching it for certain indicators of like application crashes, right? The web server is down, the typical awesome video. Anybody watch that YouTube video recently? Yeah, okay. I watch that like every couple of months. It makes me like, anyways, just takes me back to a time. But one of the things, like as security professionals, a lot of times I find some organizations, they're not cognizant of those at all. They're only watching their security tools, right? But what you can find is, and what he's kind of getting at is, if you're seeing both and you see like an uptick in certain IDS signatures and you're like, is this real? Something that if you go back and you're looking at your system logs and you're looking at your application logs and you're like, oh, it is legitimately doing this, and yep, it looks that way every single night and everything else, it shows you an area where you can start to tune those signatures a little bit to make them a little less either noisy or a little bit more accurate to your environment. Like the reality is there's no way that you're just going to turn on the ET Pro, hit set from Snort and get 100% accuracy. So there's a big, huge security picture that you're going to get out of those syslogs and those operational logs that are going to correlate. They're going to really tell you whether or not, like if you have those lining up and you can look at both simultaneously, they're going to tell you really quick whether or not that's a valid threat and whether or not that's really something that you need to waste your time looking at. I mean, is that?
Oh yeah, you're spot on with it. Like when I first built the IDS, it was throwing off alerts for stuff that I'd never seen before. Like I was like, why am I having traffic spikes like this time of day? And I had to go in and verify with Matt and a bunch of other people what was happening at this time. Is it something that we're doing on our side, or is it something that doesn't need to be happening?
And this is why, like, that importance of when I mentioned earlier, centrally locating them and pulling them in as close to real time as possible. Because if you got your security appliances, so if you think about it from an incident perspective, right? An alert triggers, and now you begin the initial, like, okay, I'm going to see whether or not this threat is valid, and you start to, like, if you don't have those logs readily available to you, how much time do you lose? Like, you know, how, when you click acknowledge or suppress or whatever, I mean, what are you basing that on? Are you basing it on strictly this happens all the time? You know, because that's what a lot of security, you know, we tend to do that, right? Well, I see that a lot, and the last 5 or 6 times I clicked it, it wasn't anything, and, you know, but that one time it wasn't, and that's when, you know, like, what you call them is exfiltrated, you know, all my credit card data out of Target, you know. Those are the types of things that, you know, if you have that log data immediately available to you, that's really where you'll start to see, you can start to really make that intelligent decision, and you can train your, whether it's you or other people on your team, how to validate that threat very quickly. And sometimes there's value in not suppressing certain signatures or allowing them to fire, because, you know, sometimes it's a backup and other times it may not be.
Exactly. You know, yeah, it's one of those things where, like, I have three applications that run for logging on one box for the IDS, right? So one brings in all your data and it reads all the PCAP files and then it stores it as a PCAP. Then I have another application that goes through and it reads the PCAP, everything that's already been logged. And then my third application goes through and it indexes all the signatures that are coming through at the high, medium, or low setting. And this all happens in real time. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The box never gets turned off unless if I turn it off or restart it. The logs are there. Once, because everybody runs out of disk space eventually, where do you go? I pull those logs. They're not removed. They don't end up in a trash somewhere. They're kept. And that gives us, a time frame for, if something a couple months down the road, if it does happen, I'm able to go back and I can really look for that if I didn't see it.
To add to what Kevin's talking about, I've had this conversation before, but not only having like the IDS type logs, but you're also collecting the operational logs. Like I went in our log management where I still collect everything, and I actually have it where there's enough SSH brute force attempts, maybe not on the IDS logs, you actually block it, but I actually automate with the XR format, the extended abuse reporting format. I have it automatically email out back to the abuse contact for that IP space. And since I have access to those original OS logs, I can actually attach them automatically as evidence. And trust me, when a legitimate abuse contact, like a rack space, gets an alert that shows Pi and D-Link and all these usernames that they're attempting against your system, from there, they'll actually care and act on it.
Right. Any other questions? You guys good?
So I was talking to him a little bit earlier. So take out the top 10, 15, 20 countries that we know are actively doing the ADPs. Are you seeing anything where they're using IP space, like, say, in the Caribbean? Because I'm starting to see a lot of that in my logs where it looks like we're seeing the same types of attacks, but they're actually using different IP space because we're going to block them if we know they're coming from this country, I'm blocking this country.
So I've seen a lot of stuff, not like small islands, but like Mexico, like some weird traffic coming out of Mexico, and it's not persistent, but like when it does hit, it hits, and it's like, it's really weird. I mean, it is Mexico and it is the Wild West there, and the internet is the Wild West, but it's very interesting to see that, Mexico is doing some of the brute force attacks they're trying to do, which is fine, but like...
And the ones that I'm seeing are running over ports that were ports that you would be used to seeing from one of your Chinas or your Eastern Bloc countries. So they're trying to send the same payloads. However, they're coming from little small countries in the Caribbean and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen anything really from Caribbean. Something interesting that I learned the other day about some of the attacks. Do you know where like 80% of denial of service attacks come from?
U.S.
India. Yeah, they did this big study on it, and they were talking about the massive amount of computers that are infected over India due to like not really having regulations on a lot of stuff and computers being compromised. They're starting to deliver, all these attacks out of there. Another thing that you also have to be, careful about with some of these attacks is like, your Russian hackers that you're seeing. A lot of the malware and the crypto stuff that we're seeing is all coming from over there. The guy who, made CryptoLocker has, he makes $2.8 million a month just off ransomware. So, I mean, we have threats like that coming that we still don't know how to stay protected against, because you can do whatever you want, they're still going to find a way to bring it through the way that they're embedding these applications.
Now, I'll throw out an interesting story. So we everybody raised their hand about ransomware earlier, right? So some of the stuff that's coming out, it's a real concern for businesses. And while a lot of it is thought to be, like originally the ransomware was really hitting like individuals and things like that, I want my kids' pictures and stuff like that. I can't tell, I've had like 3 or 4 calls in the past few weeks about businesses getting hit by ransomware. And now the delivery mechanism may have been like a really personal thing where they were doing something personal real quick on their computer, like Facebook or something like that. But one of the things, like some of the newer ones that are coming out, is they're actually like any mapped drive on that computer gets hit. And so I had an organization recently was like, our entire NAS drive got completely locked for the entire company because the dude was like on the company network and it got hit, and they were like, can you help us, and it's like, you're screwed. Yeah, I mean, and these guys are, so there's something to be said for, you'll get these different feeds of stuff, and, these are, traditionally there'll be like a feed for, home type of stuff, and they'll kind of split off and stuff. But I just, like you mentioned, those are those Eastern Bloc European countries and things like that, Russians and other things that you traditionally attribute. But a lot of those tool sets are becoming more widely available, and they're becoming lower and lower, in the kind of the hacker chain of value, if that makes sense. And so there's one of these things like to be aware of from a business perspective, where you don't traditionally think of like CryptoLocker hitting, or a variant of CryptoLocker hitting a business. It's really, I'm surprised I haven't heard more about it, and I'm glad. I was laughing when you mentioned it, because that's exactly what's happening. I've had like a huge uptick in companies calling me recently, like it got our entire freaking file server.
Right, we see that a lot as well. And my thing is on like personal level, somebody sends me a zip file that has PDFs in it, I'm not going to open it. No way. You send me a zip file, I'm not going to open it anyway. But it was confirmed yesterday. How many people in here download torrents? You don't have to raise a hand. I know everybody in here downloads torrents.
You're guilty.
They found a way to bind the crypto application to a torrent file. So when it loads in your torrent client, computer's infected. And it pulls for a magnet and a bunch of other stuff as well. So we're starting to see a rise of that.
So, one thing that you mentioned about the DOS attacks, I'll throw out, and, interesting, and the reason why I said U.S., I don't, that's not based on any, like, legit, like, data, empirical evidence that I have, but one of the things I'll throw out there, too, throw out to you guys as well, is that, so something that's really interesting, there are a lot of attacks, that originate from the United States. And so I see a lot of customers like, we're blocking this to this country, or even ones that it just cracks me up. They're like, well, our greatest threat actor is this, country that is CN, is their, whatever. It's like, okay, great. Let me see your, what are you doing to mitigate that threat? They're not even blocking IP space from that country code, and it's, yeah, that's a very minor thing that you can do, but it's like that just weeds out a ton of noise that you have to sift through, right? Like if you're going to say that's your greatest threat actor and you haven't even begun to block traffic from that company, like friggin' come on. But one of the things that's being used as a launching point for a large number of attacks are United States colleges and universities.
Yeah, they're wide open.
I mean, it is amazing how much stuff. So there was one that I was had worked with recently. It was a university, had 10 gig uplink, like symmetrical, 10 gig connection. that is like a friggin' dosser's wet dream, you know? Like, I'm like, all I gotta do is friggin' get a box on that network, and guess what? These guys love freaking downloading pirated stuff, right? You know, these are college students. It's free. Nothing, I thought that would kill. I don't know. Laugh at me. Just cast your hatred on me. But I mean, that sounds kind of crazy, but I mean, it was insane. Like, I mean, and then we had and then a few weeks later had another university come through, and we're literally sitting there watching traffic, and we're kind of going through, and we're like, there's this, you know, spike in DNS to this like one thing is like sticking out, this DNS request, and the way that we found this was through syslog traffic, okay? Because your firewall logs and other things are not going to show you, unless you're just reverse resolving and doing some stuff that's not a normal thing in your firewall log, you're not going to see DNS logs through your connectivity traffic, okay? Hopefully I'm not like shocking anybody there. Anybody not know that? Unless you enable that on a Cisco firewall, it does not do that for you. Anyways, and we're watching logs, and we see this huge spike, and we're like, what's going on? And we start doing some research, and it's literally a latent DNS amplification attack that this major university was actively contributing to. Okay, their DNS servers were being used, and why the hell they were relying, you know, DNS queries inbound from like countries that, you know, from anybody not internal to them, like that's their own friggin' problem. But we never would have found that they were contributing to it without those logs. B, that they were allowing inbound DNS queries from places that weren't belonging to the university. Yeah, go check your stuff for that, all right? Anybody that's resonating at all? I hope. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you guys for coming.
You all suck.